Society teaches us to look right through the homeless, as if poverty is a contagious disease. But when 22-year-old Chloe gave her last drop of warmth to a terrifying stranded giant in the freezing rain, she had no idea she had just saved a king. The next morning, his army arrived. The rain in Portland, Oregon didn't just fall, it assaulted the city. It was a freezing, relentless sheets of ice kind of downpour that cut through layers of clothing and chilled the marrow in your bones. For 22-year-old Chloe Higgins, the rain was a death sentence. Chloe lived in a patched-up navy blue camping tent tucked into the muddy, trash-strewn embankment under the Burnside Bridge. She wasn't an addict, and she wasn't crazy. She was just a casualty of a broken foster care system, aged out at 18 with a garbage bag of hand-me-down clothes and absolutely nowhere to go. 4 years on the concrete had thinned her out, hollowing her cheeks and leaving permanent dark bruises of exhaustion under her hazel eyes. On this particular Tuesday night in November, the temperature plummeted to a brutal 34 degrees. Chloe sat shivering violently in her damp sleeping bag, her lips tinted blue, clutching a small rusted tin cup. She had exactly 1 Sterno heating can left and 2 scoops of cheap instant coffee. It was her emergency reserve, meant for a night exactly like this when the cold started to make her feel dangerously sleepy. Then she heard it, over the deafening roar of the rain and the distant hum of highway traffic. A violent, metallic grinding sound echoed from the slick pavement to the access road just above her camp. It was the heavy, guttural sputter of a massive motorcycle engine dying a painful death. A few loud backfires popped like gunshots, followed by the heavy thud of a machine being kicked in sheer frustration in a string of deep, booming curses that cut right through the storm. Chloe hesitated. The golden rule of the streets was simple: mind your own business and stay out of sight. But the curses turned into harsh, wet coughing. The coughing sounded desperate, wrapping a torn plastic tarp around her frail shoulders. Chloe unzipped her tent and crept up the muddy embankment. Peering over the concrete barrier, she saw him. He was a mountain of a man, standing at least 6'4", pacing furiously beside a massive, custom black Harley-Davidson Road Glide. The bike was dead, oil bleeding into the puddles around the tires. The mud was dressed in heavy, soaked denim and a soaking wet leather vest. Even through the sheets of rain, Chloe could see the unmistakable crimson and white patches on his back. The top rocker read, "Hell's Angles." The center patch was the infamous winged death's head. This was not a man you approached. This was Rick Sullivan, the president of the local charter, though Chloe didn't know his name yet. She only knew the terrifying reputation of the men who wore those colors. Rick yanked his cell phone from his pocket, swore violently when the waterlogged screen refused to turn on, and hurled it against a brick retaining wall, shattering it into pieces. He stood there in the freezing downpour, a dangerous man rendered completely powerless by a blown gasket and a dead battery. He was shivering, his massive chest heaving, his bare, tattooed arms turning a sickly shade of purple in the sleet. Chloe knew what hypothermia looked like. She had seen it take 2 people in her camp last winter. Fear screamed at her to go back to her tent, but her conscience anchored her feet to the pavement. She stepped out from behind the concrete barrier. "Hey," she called out, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. Rick spun around, his hand instinctively dropping toward the heavy steel chain at his hip. His eyes, dark and furious beneath a dripping bandana, locked onto her. "What do you want?" he barked, his voice like grinding gravel. "Back off, kid. I'm not in the mood." Chloe flinched, but didn't retreat. She tightened the plastic tarp around her shoulders. "You're freezing," she said, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "Your lips are blue. If you stand out here in this wind, you're going to drop." Rick sneered, wiping the freezing rain from his eyes. "My problem, not yours. Go back to your bridge." "I have a tent," Chloe said, taking a step closer, pointing down the muddy slope. "It's not much. It leaks a little on the left side, but it blocks the wind, and I have a little fire. "And coffee." Rick stared at her. He looked at her soaking wet sneakers, her incredibly thin frame, and the pathetic piece of plastic she was using as a raincoat. He was a man who commanded a brotherhood of 85 hardened outlaws. He ran businesses, dealt with rival clubs, and bowed to no one. Yet here was a homeless girl with absolutely nothing to her name, offering him the only dry square footage she possessed. Another violent shiver racked his massive frame. He looked down at his dead bike. "I can't leave her," he muttered, patting the leather seat. "Nobody comes down this access road at night," Chloe assured him. "It'll be here in the morning." "But you won't be if you stay out here." Rick hesitated, then gave a curt, defeated nod. "Lead the way." He followed her down the treacherous mudslide, nearly losing his footing twice in his heavy biker boots. When he squeezed his massive frame into Chloe's tiny two-person tent, the canvas strained. The smell inside was of damp earth and mildew, but Chloe was right. It was dead silent from the biting wind. Chloe quickly struck a damp match and lit her single tonneau can. The tiny blue flame danced in the dark. She poured the last of her bottled water into a battered tin pot, balanced it over the flame, and dumped in her final 2 scoops of instant coffee. Rick sat cross-legged, taking up more than half the space, watching her every move. He noticed the violent tremor in her hands. He noticed the emptiness of the tent, no food wrappers, no extra blankets, just the solitary duffel bag. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice softer now, lacking the venom from the street. "Chloe." "Rick," he replied, holding out a massive, calloused hand. Chloe shook it. His grip was surprisingly gentle. When the water finally boiled, Chloe poured the muddy, bitter liquid into her only clean thermos cap and handed it to him. "What about you?" Rick asked, looking at the single cup. "I don't really like coffee," Chloe lied, forcing a smile. Her stomach cramped violently. The warm liquid would have been heaven. Rick wasn't stupid. He saw right through her. He took 2 long gulps, letting the boiling liquid warm his chest, then handed the cup back. "Drink the rest. That's an order." Chloe didn't argue. She drank the remaining coffee, the warmth spreading through her freezing core like a miracle. For the next 3 hours they sat in the dim blue light of the steno camp. Rick didn't talk much about his plab, and Chloe didn't pry. Instead, he asked about her. She found herself telling this intimidating stranger things she hadn't spoken aloud in years. She told him about her mother's illness, the string of abusive foster homes, and how she had run away rather than let the system break her spirit completely. Rick listened in absolute silence, his jaw clenching periodically. Around 3 a.m., the rain finally slowed to a drizzle. A heavy set of headlights swept across the bridge above, accompanied by the distinct rumble of a diesel truck. "That'll be my prospect," Rick said, his voice dropping an octave. "Told him to sweep the route if I didn't check in." He slowly uncrossed his legs and ducked out of the small tent flap. Before he stood up to climb the muddy hill, he reached deep into the pocket of his heavy leather vest and pulled out a thick, solid silver Zippo lighter. It was deeply engraved with the Hells Angels Death's Head logo on one side and the letters R. Esperez on the other. He pressed the heavy metal into Chloe's palm, wrapping her cold fingers around it. "Keep this safe," Rick commanded, looking her dead in the eyes. "I'm coming back for it tomorrow. You hear me? Don't go anywhere." Before Chloe could say a word, he turned and trudged up the hill, his massive silhouette disappearing into the fog. The next morning broke with a sickly, gray light. The storm had passed, leaving behind a bone-chilling dampness that made the air feel heavy. Chloe woke up stiff and aching, coughing up phlegm into a dirty tissue. She uncurled her fingers. The silver zipper was still there, cold and heavy against her palm. She stared at the winged skull. Part of her wondered if the whole night had been a fever dream. A man like Rick Sullivan didn't belong in her world, and he certainly wasn't coming back to this faithy riverbank. Men like him made promises to girls like her all the time, and they never meant a single word of it. Her grim thoughts were interrupted by the harsh crunch of boots on gravel. Well, well, well. Look who survived the flood. Chloe's blood ran cold. She quickly shoved the silver lighter deep into her jacket pocket and crawled out of the tent. Standing there was Tommy Harding, known on the streets as Tommy the Rat. Tommy wasn't homeless. He was a bottom feeder who preyed on them. He was a meth dealer and a self-appointed tax collector for the encampments along the river. He was flanked by two of his usual goons, gaunt, twitchy men holding baseball bats, resting lazily on their shoulders. "Rent's due, Chloe," Tommy sneered, spitting a wad of sunflower seeds into the mud inches from her boots. "I already paid you for the month, Tommy," Chloe said, keeping her voice steady despite the frantic pounding of her heart. "I gave you the $40 last week." "Inflation, sweetheart," Tommy laughed, a nasty wheezing sound. "Storm tax. You want to keep this prime real estate under the bridge, it's going to cost you another 20. Otherwise, me and the boys are going to have to help you pack up." "I don't have $20, Chloe pleaded, taking a step back as Tommy advanced. "I don't have anything. Look at me." "Check the tent, boys." Tommy snapped his fingers. The two goons surged forward. One of them kicked Chloe's tiny camping stove, sending it tumbling into the river. The other unzipped her tent and began blindly ripping her belongings out, tossing her sleeping bag into the mud and shaking out her duffel bag. "Stop, please, there's nothing in there," Chloe cried out, stepping forward, but Tommy violently shoved her backward. She slipped in the mud and landed hard on her shoulder. As she hit the ground, the silver Zippo lighter slid out of her jacket pocket and landed in the dirt with a heavy metallic clink. Tommy's eyes locked onto it instantly. He stepped over and scooped it out of the mud, wiping the dirt off on his jeans. He whistled as he felt the weight of the solid silver. "Well, look at this," Tommy grinned, turning the lighter over in his hands. He looked at the engraved skull, completely ignorant of what it represented. To him, a skull was just a cool biker decoration. He didn't understand the sacred nature of a club patch or the absolute danger of holding a Hells Angels president's property. "Lying to me, Chloe? Saying you ain't got nothing while you're holding out on pure silver? Give that back," Chloe screamed, scrambling to her feet, sudden desperate fire igniting in her chest. "It's not mine. You can't take that." "I just did," Tommy laughed, pocketing the lighter. "Consider us square for the month." He turned his back on her, signaling his boys to leave. Chloe stood in the ruins of her ripped tent and mud-soaked sleeping bag, tears of pure, unadulterated despair finally spilling over her cheeks. It was over. Her shelter was ruined. Her heap was gone, and the one thing a powerful man had trusted her to hold on to had been stolen. The streets had finally won. She sank to her knees in the mud, wrapping her arms around herself, waiting for the cold to take her. But then she felt it. It didn't start as a sound. It started as a vibration in the concrete pylons of the Burnside Bridge. It was a low, rhythmic trembling that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath her knees. Tommy and his goons stopped halfway up the gravel path, looking around in confusion. The vibration grew into a deep, guttural thrumming. It sounded like a massive swarm of angry hornets multiplying by the second. Then came the roar. It was a deafening mechanical thunder that echoed off the river and shook the glass windows of the warehouses a mile away. Chloe looked up at the access road above. First came two riders, side by side, their front wheels turning in perfect synchronization. Then came four more behind them. Then 8. Then 20. A seemingly endless sea of gleaming chrome, matte black steel, and roaring V-twin engines flooded the access road, completely blocking off the bridge, the street, and all escape routes. The air instantly filled with the heavy masculine scent of exhaust fumes and hot oil. 85 motorcycles shut off their engines almost simultaneously. The sudden silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the noise. Tommy stood frozen on the gravel path, his cocky sneer completely vanishing, replaced by chalk-white terror. He recognized the red and white patches now. Everyone in the city did. From the center of the massive pack, the crowd of leather-clad giants parted. Walking down the muddy embankment, flanked by two men holding heavy steel chains, was Rick Sullivan. He was no longer the shivering, vulnerable man from the night before. He was moving with the terrifying, predatory grace of an apex predator. Rick stopped 5 feet from Tommy. He didn't look at the drug dealer. He looked past him, down at the bottom of the hill where Chloe was kneeling in the mud beside her destroyed tent. He saw the tears on her face. He saw the footprint on her sleeping bag. Rick's jaw clenched. The muscles in his massive neck bulged. When he finally turned his dark, dead eyes back to Tommy, the street thug visibly trembled. "You got a lot of nerve, boy," Rick whispered, his voice dangerously low, carrying easily in the dead silence. "Standing in my living room, disrespecting my host." Tommy swallowed hard, taking a trembling step backward. I didn't know, man. We're just collecting rent. We didn't know she was with you." Rick held out his massive hand, palm up. "I left something with the girl," Rick said, his voice dropping another terrifying octave. "I believe you had it in your left pocket." Tommy the Rat's bravado evaporated faster than a drop of water on a hot exhaust pipe. He stood paralyzed, his eyes darting frantically from the massive, scowling faces of the bikers, blocking the access road to the imposing figure of Rick Sullivan, standing inches away from him. The two goons who had so happily destroyed Chloe's tent just moments before had already dropped their baseball bats into the mud. They were visibly trembling, backing away slowly, desperately hoping the sea of leather and denim would somehow part and let them escape. But the Hells Angels did not move. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a solid, impenetrable wall of brotherhood and muscle. Tommy's hand shook violently as he reached into the left pocket of his dirty jeans. His breathing was shallow, rapid, like a cornered animal realizing the trap had finally snapped shut. His fingers brushed against the cold metal of the silver Zippo. He pulled it out, the engraved winged skull catching the dull gray morning light, and held it out toward Rick as if it were a live grenade. Rick didn't snatch it. He simply extended his hand, palm up, and waited. Tommy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and placed the lighter into the giant biker's palm. I swear to God, man, I was just holding it," Tommy stammered, his voice cracking. "I didn't take it from her. She dropped it. I was gonna give it back. You know how it is down here, people steal things. I was keeping it safe for her." Rick's expression didn't change. He slowly closed his fist around the silver lighter, feeling the familiar weight of it. He took a single, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them so entirely that Tommy was forced to look straight up into the president's dark, furious eyes. "I built this charter 20 years ago," Rick said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried perfectly in the dead silence of the morning. "I know every rat, every dealer, and every piece of garbage that crawls along this river. I know who you are, Tommy, and I know exactly what you do to people who can't fight back. Not swell and a subtrue." Rick leaned in, his face inches from Tommy's. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever miserable possessions you have and get out of Portland," Rick whispered, the venom in his tone unmistakable. "If I see your face in this city again, if my brothers see your shadow on these streets, or if I hear you even breathed in the direction of this bridge, you won't need to worry about collecting rent ever again. You understand me?" Tommy couldn't even speak. He just nodded frantically, his face completely drained of color. "Run," Rick commanded. Tommy and his two goons didn't look back. They scrambled up the muddy gravel embankment, slipping and sliding in their desperation, shoving past the line of silent bikers who parted just enough to let them flee like frightened insects. The heavy roar of laughter from a few of the angels chased them down the street until they disappeared entirely from view. With the trash disposed off, the thick, terrifying tension in the air instantly dissolved. Rick turned his back on the retreating thugs and looked down at Chloe. She was still kneeling in the mud, clutching the edges of her soaked, torn jacket. She was shivering uncontrollably, tears streaming down her pale dirt-streaked face. She looked so incredibly small, so entirely broken by the cruelty of the world, that it sent a sharp ache through the chest of the hardened outlaw. Rick walked down the slope, ignoring the deep mud ruining his heavy boots. He knelt in front of her, his massive frame blocking the biting wind rolling off the Willamette River. "You okay, kid?" he asked gently. It was the same soft, paternal voice he had used in the tent the night before. Chloe couldn't find her words. She just looked at him, then up at the 85 intimidating men standing silently above them, watching her with a strange, fierce protectiveness. She finally nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her freezing hand. He wrecked everything," Chloe whispered, her voice breaking as she looked at her shredded sleeping bag and the broken poles of her navy blue tent. "It's all ruined." Rick didn't look at the mess. He looked at her. He unbuttoned his heavy, fleece-lined flannel shirt from beneath his leather club vest and wrapped it around Chloe's trembling shoulders. The shirt was enormous on her, practically swallowing her whole, but it radiated incredible, life-saving heat. "Don't worry about this garbage," Rick said, standing up and offering her his hand. "You're done with this bridge. You kept your word to me. Now I'm keeping mine to you." Rick whistled sharply. From the top of the ridge, a massive man with a thick red beard, the vice president, a guy named Garrett, stepped forward. "Garrett, bring the truck down." Rick shouted. A heavy, blacked-out Chevy Silverado rumbled down the access road, towing a flatbed trailer. Sitting securely on the trailer was Rick's black Harley-Davidson, completely struck down and ready for the repair shop. The truck pulled to a halt at the top of the embankment. The passenger door swung open, and a young prospect named Wyatt jumped out, leaving the heater blasting on maximum. "Let's go," Rick said, gently pulling Chloe to her feet. Chloe hesitated, looking back at her meager belongings scattered in the mud. It was all she had in the world. But Rick placed a heavy, reassuring hand on her back, guiding her away from the ruins of her old life. "Leave it," he told her. "You won't need any of it where you're going." The ride to the clubhouse was a surreal blur of heat and sensory overload. Chloe sat in the passenger seat of the blacked-out Chevy Silverado, the heater blasting across her frozen face, while Rick rode up front with a young prospect named Wyatt. Through the windshield, she witnessed an impossible spectacle. 85 Hells Angels riding in flawless formation, parting the gray Portland traffic like a roaring river of steel. No one honked. No one drifted into their lane. In the center of this rolling fortress, for the first time in 4 agonizing years, Chloe felt unconditionally safe. They pulled into a sprawling, high-fenced industrial compound on the city's outskirts. It wasn't a seedy dive bar. It was an impeccably clean custom motorcycle garage attached to a massive 2-story brick sanctuary. The mud Chloe stepped inside, the rich scents of roasting meat, fresh coffee, and expensive leather washed over her. A colossal stone hearth crackled with a roaring fire at the center of the room. Before she could process the framed patches or the heavy oak bar, she was swept up by Sarah. Sarah was the vice president's wife, a tough-as-nails woman with silver hair and fiercely maternal eyes. "Lord, sweetheart, you are nothing but bones and bruises," Sarah fussed, peeling the wet, pathetic plastic top from Chloe's shoulders. "We are getting you into a scalding shower right now, and then we are putting some meat on those ribs." For the next 2 hours, Chloe was treated with a gentleness she hadn't known since childhood. Sarah drew a steaming bath in the upstairs quarters, providing thick towels, clean sweatpants, and an oversized hoodie bearing the Support 81 logo. When Chloe finally descended the stairs, the sickly blue tint had vanished from her skin, replaced by a flush of actual warmth. She was guided to a heavy wooden table where a plate piled high with hot steak, mashed potatoes, and roasted vegetables awaited. She ate with desperate speed, nearly choking, while Sarah sat beside her, rubbing her back and pouring glasses of milk. As she finished, The main hall quieted. Most of the men had dispersed to the garage. Rick walked over, pulling out a chair across from her. He placed his silver Zippo lighter on the wood between them. "Feeling better?" he asked, his massive arms crossed over his chest. "I don't know how to thank you," Chloe whispered, staring at her empty plate. "For the food, the clothes, for getting rid of Tommy. You didn't have to do any of this." "I did," Rick replied, his expression turning dead serious. He leaned forward, the leather of his vest creaking. "I didn't tell you the whole truth last night, Chloe, about why I was stuck on that road." Chloe looked up, confused. "Your bike broke down." "The bike died, yes," Rick nodded slowly. "But that wasn't the real problem. The problem was my heart." Chloe's hazel eyes widened. "I started a new blood pressure medication 2 days ago," Rick explained, his gravelly voice dropping so only she could hear. "My doctor told me not to ride until we figured out the dosage. But I'm a stubborn old fool. When I got soaked in that freezing rain, my body went into shock. The muds reacted violently with the hypothermia. My chest was tightening. I was losing feeling in my left arm. When I was kicking my Harley, I wasn't just angry. I was terrified. I knew I was about to go into massive cardiac arrest right there in the mud." He reached out, his calloused finger tapping the silver lighter. "When you brought me into that tent and handed me that boiling coffee, you didn't just warm me up, you stabilized my core temperature just enough to stop my heart from completely failing. You gave me your absolute last drop of fuel, your last bit of heat, and you didn't even know my name." Rick swallowed hard, his dark eyes shining with unspoken emotion. "You saved my life." Chloe sat paralyzed. She thought she was just giving a stranded giant a place to sit. She had no idea she had been holding the fragile thread of his life in her trembling hands. "In this club," Rick continued, his voice thick with absolute conviction, "loyalty is our religion. You pay your debts. You save the president of this charter. That means 85 men owe you a debt that can never fully be repaid." Rick reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy set of brass keys. He slid them across the table. "We own the apartment building a block down the street. Unit 2B is empty. It has a real heater, a full kitchen, and a steel lock that nobody gets through. It's yours. Rent is covered indefinitely." Chloe stared at the keys, her vision blurring as hot tears spilled over her cheeks. "Rick, I can't. I don't have a job to pay for groceries. They're not at... Garrett tells me you kept a perfect ledger of your own cash," Rick interrupted softly. "We need someone to run the books at the custom shop. You start Monday, 18 an hour plus benefits. Sarah will take you to buy real clothes tomorrow." Chloe finally broke down, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as 4 years of terror and cold evaporated into the warm air. Rick stood, walked around the table, and placed a massive hand on her head. "Welcome home, Chloe." 1 year later, the frightened girl from the bridge was gone. Chloe Higgins was thriving. She managed the garage's books with ruthless precision. Her cheeks were full, and she never went cold. Whenever she walked the streets of Portland, she walked without fear. Everyone knew she was the girl who saved the king, forever guarded by an army of leather-clad angels. Sometimes the greatest angels don't wear halos. They wear heavily patched leather. Chloe's journey proved that a single selfless act of kindness in the darkest storm can completely rewrite your destiny. Did this incredible real-life rescue give you chills? Hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs a reminder that good still exists, and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable true stories.